Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is my colleague, editor of ForbesWomen, Maggie McGrath. Maggie, thanks for coming on in.
Thanks for having me.
The legality of an abortion pill is now in question after a federal judge in Texas blocked its FDA approval nationwide. Before we get into the legality behind all of this, I do want you to give us some background on mifepristone, the abortion pill in question.
Mifepristone is one of two drugs that are taken in a medication abortion. To be very, very clear, medication abortions account for more than 50% of abortions in this country. They are deemed very safe by the medical community. Mifepristone is a pill that was approved by the Food and Drug Administration in September of 2000. It went through 4 years of approvals by the scientific community, by the medical community. Doctors and OBGYNs say that 99.9% of patients use it without any adverse effect. It is safe, it is effective. It basically blocks a hormone that is needed to continue pregnancies. So you take mifepristone, you wait 24 to 48 hours, and then you take misoprostol, which expels the pregnancy. So that's how it works on the medical side.
From what you're saying, it sounds like it's very safe. And according to data analyzed by CNN, the drug is apparently safer than both penicillin and Viagra. So knowing all of those facts that you and I just said, why was this drug blocked?
How much time do you have? Judge Matthew Kacsmaryk in Texas is a federal judge who has a notable and long anti-abortion history. He is a conservative judge. He was appointed by President Trump. This is a political decision. It is one that he cites as being grounded in science, but that is misinformation, disinformation. He says it didn't go through the appropriate approval processes. He says that it's not safe for women. You will see a lot of this paternalistic language in a lot of these anti-abortion decisions and rulings. You know, it's for the safety of women. But the scientific community disagrees. So he put a stay on the FDA's approval of mifepristone, and he then put a 1-week stay on his stay, if you will. So basically, he gave the legal community and the Biden administration a week to challenge the opinion, and then, which they did. The Justice Department challenged it. But after a week, depending on, we're kind of in the middle of all of this right now. And what his ultimate goal is to render the approval null. So then doctors cannot prescribe mifepristone to their patients.
Maggie, I do now want to move on because in Washington state, the exact same night, there was a conflicting ruling. Federal Judge Thomas Rice there prevented the FDA from, quote, altering the status quo and rights as it relates to the availability of mifepristone. So as we sit here, is mifepristone in jeopardy? Is it safe? What do we know?
It's chaotic, is what we know. What the Washington judge ruled applies to 17 states where abortion is legal. What the Texas judge ruled applies nationwide. So we have these two conflicting rulings, and the upshot is I don't know anyone who doesn't expect this to go to the Supreme Court. You say, is mifepristone legal? Right now it is. Right now, if you have gone to plancpills.org and have put them in your medicine cabinet, if you need them right now, you can still access them if you live in a state that permits abortion. So that's the big asterisk. Obviously, we live in a country with a patchwork of abortion laws right now in the aftermath of Roe v. Wade being overturned. But right now, you can get it. And if the Texas judge's stay goes through, if he basically revokes the FDA's approval of mifepristone, he has limited doctors' ability to prescribe it. He does not limit your ability to take it. So if you procure it and the stay goes in place and you have it, check with the legal ramifications within your state, but it doesn't affect the legality of taking it. And none of this affects what medical and scientific experts have said about the efficacy and safety of this drug.
Speaking of that medical community, what has their response been?
What's really interesting is this all sounds like a political issue, but there are real business ramifications for the business community that reads Forbes, for the entrepreneurial community that reads Forbes. Some 400 biotech and pharmaceutical executives signed a letter denouncing the Texas rule. And I want to read part of that letter because I think it's important. They basically see ramifications for other drugs here. Their argument is that this judicial activism won't stop here. That's a direct quote. They say, if courts can overturn drug approvals without regard for science or evidence, or for the complexity required to fully vet the safety and efficacy of new drugs, any medicine is at risk for the same outcomes as mifepristone. While the drug development, approval, and monitoring process is not perfect, the agency's framework has resulted in decades of unsurpassed medical innovation and in mechanisms to remove drugs from the market if there are reasons to remove it from the market. So that is a very strongly worded statement from executives from Pfizer and other companies that you know, and the biggest names in biotech and pharma. They're basically saying, what happens to drugs that are in development for Alzheimer's? What happens to vaccines that are in development and need to be used? This is an attack on the abortion pill, but the ramifications are far more widespread than just reproductive health.
What you're saying and what that letter says is it sounds like it's a really slippery slope for science in general, for medicine and abortion access. Just last year, as we saw, Roe v. Wade was overturned by the Supreme Court, and the legality of these abortion pills are now in question. So what's next?
It is a slippery slope. And I think in the aftermath of the Dobbs decision, you saw a lot of reproductive rights activists saying, birth control could be next, Plan B could be next, that's emergency contraception. We've seen that on a state-by-state level. This ruling from the Texas judge invoked the Comstock Act of 1873. I'm going to say that again, 1873, which basically prohibited immoral materials from being mailed. So what does that mean for birth control? I think there are people who, in the aftermath of Dobbs, thought feminists and women's rights activists were overreacting in their response. But I interviewed former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton a few weeks ago, and she basically said the fight is not over. We need to keep fighting against the rollbacks of our rights because they're not going to stop at abortion.
I want to talk about the response of voters because voters on both sides of the aisle are not a fan of this. According to a recent Ipsos poll, 82% of Democrats and 53% of Republicans do not support banning this abortion pill. So when was the last time you saw the majority of both parties actually agreeing on something, especially in these highly partisan times, rather? And this is an issue that seems to be wildly unpopular on both sides of the aisle.
I would point to gun control, where 90% of Americans feel that there should be some sort of regulation there, but that's a separate issue. I think what we're seeing is there are actually more issues than not where there's broad political, or rather broad public agreement. It's not 100%. You're never going to get 100% agreement on all the intricacies of abortion. There are many Americans who support some restrictions in some capacity, but we have seen that the overturning of Roe is broadly unpopular. And it has in turn driven people to the polls, driven these outcomes in local races where pro-choice, pro-abortion, pro-reproductive health candidates are succeeding, because I think people want to have the full range of healthcare options available to them.
Let's talk about the politics of this here. Representative Nancy Mace, she's a Republican from South Carolina, said on CNN earlier this week that Republicans are largely on the wrong side of the abortion issue. And the overturning of Roe v. Wade was cited as one of the reasons a red wave failed to materialize for the midterms. Earlier this month, a liberal judge in Wisconsin marked the first time in over a decade that it would give the state's Supreme Court a liberal majority. And she won by 11 points. And if we remember in 2020, in Wisconsin, Joe Biden only won by less than 1 point. So this is a huge issue. Why are Republicans making this their strategy? It seems to be a losing strategy based on that data.
It does seem to be a losing strategy, but I think it has energized the fringe elements of the base. There are people who want to see abortion banned. There are people who would even say they want to see it banned nationwide. The states' rights argument is what we saw in the Dobbs decision, but there are plenty of people who say it is against my personal morals, it is against my personal religion. it is not a uniform issue, and we see that within the Republican Party. And I think the Republican Party has to contend with itself. Are they willing to keep taking this extremist position that affects the lives of millions of women?
This whole conversation, the note that keeps popping up is that this is a slippery slope. As you cited in your conversation with Hillary Clinton, the fight is not done yet when it comes to women's rights. So what does this mean for that fight in general?
You can't get complacent, you can't get tired. That's what I have heard from my sources. I think the barrage of headlines, not just this year, not just last year, it's been happening in 2021, in 2020, in 2019. You can keep going back. Ever since Roe was decided, people have been fighting to remove that right from women. And I think we see this with a lot of social justice issues. People get tired. Anger is not a sustainable emotion. So I think those who wish to fight for it have to find some other emotion and just kind of bear down and buckle in and be prepared to tell people that, hey, referencing an act from 1873 in 2023 is maybe not the best political strategy.
Maggie McGrath, I appreciate you coming on here. And as updates come, I hope you come back.
I will. Thank you so much.